next session titled The Integrated Grid.
Is my mic on?
There we go.
Look at that. You're a regular. You're going to become regular.
Six.
The issue fundamentally gets to be, some of our changes in that. How far can you go?
Are we good? Yeah, great. Hey, thanks. Good morning, everyone. We will start our next panel on the integrated grid. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then each panelist is going to go through just a couple of minutes of content and provide their perspective on the integrated grid and making the grid more transactive and provide their perspectives, and then we'll take some audience Q&A following that. So with that, let me introduce our panelists. Immediately to my left is Barbara Tyran, Director of Washington State Relations for EPRI, Susan Ackerman, the Chair of the Oregon Public Utilities Commission, and Barbara Lockwood, General Manager of Regulatory Affairs and Compliance with Arizona Public Service. So with that, I'll hand it over to Barbara Tyran to begin.
Great. Thank you, Steve. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you today. I'm going to try and answer some questions which you may not know are in your minds, but they will be framed in the course of this presentation. First of all, who is the Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI? So briefly touching on that. Then why? Why is EPRI concerned about the integrated grid? And given that answer, what is EPRI doing about it? And then the final question is back to another who. Who should be engaged in solving these problems together with us? So with that, let me turn it over and green button. There we go. So as I mentioned, we are working on the integrated grid, and EPRI was founded about 40 years ago to support the electricity sector and fulfill a public interest mission in providing R&D and technology advancement across the entire electricity sector. By that, I mean all forms of generation, the transmission and distribution system, as well as the end-use customer. Today, EPRI touches 90% of the domestic electric utility industry, as well as having 25% international membership. So that is who we are. Now, why is EPRI doing this? EPRI embarked on this journey because what we realize is that there are increasing penetration of distributed energy resources, which is a wonderful development. But the question today is, those devices are connected into the system, but they're not integrated. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that with increasing communications and intelligence through sensors in our power delivery infrastructure, we can harness the best value of those resources and optimize the value not only of the remaining baseload generation, the traditional generation, but also those distributed energy resources. That will give the system operator the situational awareness to understand how to best manage that system for the benefit of everyone, including society. So what is EPRI doing? Well, you see there are three phases. The first phase began in February of 2014 when we released the concept paper, essentially what I just described to you. What is the concept of the integrated grid? And that was at the NARUC convention that was held in Washington, D.C., followed this year at NARUC again in February of 2015 with the benefit cost framework. And I will be exploring that a little bit more fully with all of you here this morning. The final phase, which is just beginning and will take the next few years, are the pilots. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So we know from the discussions here over the last day or so and from your own line of work that the customer is very important. Customers are experiencing choice, technology choices in other parts of their world today, and they anticipate the same from their electricity provider. So the purpose of the integrated grid is to enable them to have those choices, to exercise their right to have those choices, but while doing so, to also exercise the choices that benefit the societal grid. Now that may sound like a very difficult problem. At EPRI, we have 750 engineers and scientists who say that is an engineering problem that can be solved, but we need to get on it. We need to be investing in in that, and we need to do the necessary R&D that will make that happen. So once again, the individual customer choice is preserved. That is not taken away, but we are trying to optimize the use of the grid and all our resources so that the society in general will benefit from all those individual choices. And we do this knowing that now, with the penetration of DER, distributed energy resources, we're beginning to see two-way power flow, where once again, exercising their rights as customers, they want to generate and sell excess electricity into the system. We still have baseload generation, as you all know, that wants to generate electricity and deliver to those customers who are not generating their own, thereby setting up the dynamic where we have two-way power flow. Again, something that is eminently solvable, but will require changing the system. The system was not originally designed to do that. It was designed to have one-way power flow. So we need, once again, through sensors that will enable communications and intelligence to allow that to happen in an optimal manner. And the benefit cost framework sets up the methodology that we think is consistent, repeatable, and transparent to all of you so that you can also walk through those steps of how to analyze the optimal use of our resources on every grid. So looking at the power system, we know that what used to be a very certain situation, you had dispatch of baseload generation, and you had a fairly forecastable load, knowing how people interacted with their electricity system. That is changing today. I always, at this point, like to draw everyone's attention to the proliferation of devices that are in this room today, not knowing when and how those will be recharged, but knowing that most of them will require electricity to do so. Imagine what the world will be like in a couple of decades when we'll have even more of those devices we can't even imagine today. And those will all need to be recharged. Yes, we will have battery storage, but ultimately we will trace this back to the electricity system. So that means that it's much less forecastable about what will be happening. Again, a problem that can be solved, but one that needs to be anticipated and addressed. Similarly with dispatch, we're not just dispatching the baseload generation. Half of the states have renewable portfolio standards that require first dispatch renewables. So we need to understand that relationship, because with the intermittency and the variability of most renewable energy sources, why you find that you have to be able to adjust. So again, this is something that doesn't just affect the generation side, the transmission, the distribution, or the end use side. It affects everything. And that is how the power system is looking forward. So how does that mean those component parts change? We see that consumers now have the ability to become energy producers. We know that we need to have more interactive and dynamic systems that will enable those systems to operate in a way differently from how they were originally designed and constructed. We know that we're asking more of our T&D infrastructure, not only to allow for the fluctuations and the changing requirements, load requirements that are placed on it, but also that people want to have that reliability that they've come to enjoy over the years. And finally, we have baseload generation being asked to do something very different. Typically, baseload generation operated at full capacity and was intended to be able to maximize the value of those assets. Today, particularly with renewable energy generation superseding it, we're asking those baseload plants, typically fossil and nuclear, to ramp up and ramp down in accordance with what's happening with the renewable energy resources. That's all very well and good, but those plants weren't originally designed to do that. Our EPRI engineers tell us that what that means is that those plants need more robust materials to be able to withstand the wear and tear that's being placed on them as they respond to what's happening with the renewable energy resources. The best example I like to give at this point is it's like asking an Indy race car driver who's used to lapping the track, going full out all the time, and that's his original design and purpose, to now be dropped into Midtown Manhattan and asked to operate as a taxi cab. Stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. That can be done. That race car driver can adapt and accommodate that change, but it requires a different set of qualifications and needs. So we need to make sure that our system is upgraded so it can become that new taxi driver. And as we know, this is going to be part of the entire electricity system. This is not just something that relates to any one part of it. So with the benefit cost framework, what we're trying to do is do scenarios and modeling to look at all of these relationships. How do we increase the penetration of distributed energy resources on the system without congesting the system, without compromising its integrity, without having some sort of outage problem? So we need to understand that. We're doing the best we can in labs, using simulations, using the modeling, but the reality is that's very cost effective, but it's not real life. And so what happens in real life is we're going to take this to host utilities, and we're going to set up pilots. Not every system, not every line on every system, but strategically, where we can get the greatest learnings and benefit so that we can take that information over the next few years and begin to aggregate it and share it, just as phases 1 and 2, those reports are completely public, share the results of phase 3 with the public at large. So that, again, we have something that is available as a resource and fulfills our public interest mission. We anticipate that there will be a lot of learnings from this whole process, including identification of technology and R&D gaps that still need to be fulfilled. But we see the promise of where this can go, and particularly to learn from those individual feeders where we're testing the system to learn what's happening. Again, not at the nationally aggregated level like phases 1 and 2, but specifically at the more granular level where we know that each feeder is like a snowflake. It's unique, and we need to understand the attributes and how to penetrate with DER in the best possible way. So why, this is going back to the last question, which is who should be engaged? Well, you all are involved in the energy sector. We're so glad to have a chance to be here and be part of today's discussion. We want to share the information that we've developed, the technical resources that are available to you through EPRI, and we know that there are many, many decisions still ahead. This is a public debate that will continue for years. But as we go forward, I look forward to your questions, your comments here today. And at EPRI, we always look forward to shaping the future of electricity together with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Now it works. Very good to see everybody here. What a great audience. I agree with Barbara. It's really good to see a lot of young people in this industry. We need you, and we're glad you're here, and we hope you stay. What I'm going to do today, I'm a regulator from the state of Oregon. I'm going to touch on how my commission considers and treats the new and innovative. I'm going to describe our role, because there are limits to what regulators can do regarding the smart grid. I'm going to offer a few observations about smart grid technologies, talk about our regulatory policy, and then offer some thoughts about the future of the grid and the smart grid. So this is a state regulator role. This is in our statutes, and just about every commission has the same objective in their statutes. Our job can be summed up like this: assure safe, adequate, and reliable service at just and reasonable rates, and under Oregon law, we are required to balance the needs of customers and shareholders. In other words, all smart grid investments have to go through this same regulatory filter, just like any utility investment. So a few observations about smart grid, and these aren't original to me. You have all heard these before. First, smart grid technologies and applications hold real promise for improving the functioning and reliability of our power system. Second, these new technologies and applications present more risk, more uncertainty, and more complexity than traditional utility investments, which makes them much harder for us to evaluate. They're in different stages of development. We don't have a lot of direct experience with them. The benefits and costs are uncertain and can be difficult to estimate. And the issues surrounding them are evolving, such as cybersecurity, and it goes on and on. Third, many of the investments have qualities of something that we economists like to call public goods. That is, the benefits of the investment can't be fully captured by a utility and its customers, and that discourages investments. Similarly, it doesn't pay to be an early adopter because you incur costs you could avoid if you waited. So that also discourages investments. So for all such investments, we either need to take collaborative action or we need the government to step in with public funding for public goods. So a little bit about our regulatory policy in Oregon. At a very high level, our aim is to create an environment that is conducive to utility experimentation and efficient investment in innovative technologies and applications, but we want to be smart about it. And we seek to do that in 6 ways. One is to encourage pilots and other forms of tests and experiments to learn by doing and then scale up to successful projects. Two is to use benefit cost analysis to judge investments but take a longer view of the benefits. Our test for smart grid investments is whether the benefits to consumers outweigh the costs, but we do count benefits that accrue after costs are recouped, and we count potential benefits we can't quantify. Three, we expect our utilities to continually evaluate promising technologies and applications. In 2012, we issued an order that required our utilities to annually develop and review plans for smart grid investments in collaboration with us and our stakeholders. And then following on to that, seeking out those investments that will produce net benefits to consumers. What we're trying to encourage is an ongoing annual cycle of evaluation and investment in innovation. Four, we need to address the risk. With innovation comes risk, and you have to embrace the risk in order to be innovative, but we want to be smart about it. For example, we wouldn't want to put big financial bets on technologies that can go obsolete in 5 years, or that could sacrifice reliability and quality of service. And we want to take the necessary actions to prevent and minimize cyber attacks. So our thrust is just to keep moving forward, and when errors are possible, try to keep them small. 5 is to provide a clear pathway to cost recovery. Utilities are not going to invest in riskier new technology unless they see a reasonable opportunity to recoup their costs, earn a bit to boot, and not be second-guessed at the future if performance lags. We don't pre-approve projects in Oregon, but we do stress doing a lot of upfront work on potential investments through systematic evaluation and testing so we can acknowledge the investment. Acknowledge is a term of art in my state. What it means is that we conclude, based on what we know today, that the utilities' plans and investments make sense. Once acknowledged, cost recovery is highly likely, subject always, of course, to utility performance risk. And we don't change our minds if the world ends up being different than we all thought it was going to be at the time the investment was acknowledged. So as you can see, what we've done is to try to use our basic traditional regulatory approach to evaluate smart grid. Last is to support collaborative and government action to conduct R&D and to bring forward new technologies and demonstrate new applications. As I mentioned, there are limits to what regulators can do. Collaboration, like jointly funding targeted R&D projects, is really the best approach for many utilities. And a great example of this is the Electric Power Research Institute. Barbara was very humble about EPRI, but I'm very glad for EPRI because this is where a lot of good, solid work goes on that's useful to consumers. So what has Oregon done today to advance smart systems? 2 of our electric utilities have installed advanced meters for virtually all of their customers. For our very largest utility, which is Portland General Electric, we approved the installation of those advanced meters, and we included 12 pages of conditions on that order that required the utility to do a number of things, such as implement a voluntary critical peak pricing pilot, implementing a direct load control program, implementing a demand response program for large users, and they've recently now moved into a program for residential and small commercial customers. And they have been launching a work on an automated outage management system, among other system improvements. We also required our utilities to evaluate and implement conservation voltage reduction measures and to consider investments in smart grid technologies when a conventional one is being considered. And we launched a cybersecurity effort. At annual workshops, the utilities come in, they present their approaches to cybersecurity and their programs, and we have an opportunity to ask questions and challenge them. Then we generate a joint action plan with them. Now I'm going to turn to the future, and this is probably where I'm going to lose a lot of people in the audience. But the question asked is how to value resources in a plug-and-play architecture. And this assumes a future that we regulators cannot afford to assume. At least this regulator is not assuming that future. The future assumed here is one where technology transforms our power system, including where most new supply is from small-scale distributed and variable renewable resources, where customers become power producers and contribute actively on the demand side of the system, all this enabled by technology, where values will be established for infinitesimally small buy and sell transactions on the distribution system and the grid, with technology automating it all for us, and we are all assuming that the system will continue to work. That could be the future, or maybe not. I have to admit I'm skeptical, and it seems to me that we're asking the wrong questions. We seem to be asking, how can we promote a customer-enabled smart grid that takes full advantage of technology, renewable resource, and distributed generation, and how do we remake the grid in order to accommodate this future? But frankly, I don't think that's the question. The question is, how can we decarbonize the grid at an affordable cost and maintain grid reliability a modern economy requires? So what does it mean to decarbonize the grid while keeping power supplies affordable and reliable? There are 3 things that this question tells me. First, there is no one-size-fits-all. Every region is different because we start with our own resources, our own geography, and our own cultures. Hawaii and California are having very real operational problems with high penetration of variable solar DG resources, and they're having these problems right now. California has experienced terrible and prolonged outages following a succession of big storms. They were also, I understand, in the market for a very large substation investment, and their utility commission asked them to move on and try something different. So they may move faster than Oregon, and these states, frankly, might be able to cost justify a plug-and-play system. Oregon is a relatively small state from a population standpoint. We really can't afford to make big mistakes with our energy supplies, so we will pay very close attention to facts and context, and we will let the future develop as technology, economics, and customer preferences reveal themselves. Then we'll act accordingly. So for us, smart grid is a means to an end. It is not the end in and of itself. Second, the question of decarbonization will have to address affordability, and the needs of lower income customers. The customers I see, and here I'm talking about actual customers, not representatives, advocates, or product vendors, tell me that they're choosing between heating and eating, or they're angry because there was an outage that severely affected their lives. In Oregon, from 2009 to 2011, requests for energy bill assistance more than quadrupled from 10,000 to 50,000, and we're a low-cost state. So I don't see inherent value to all customers from a plug-and-play transactive energy future. I just see more costs, and that's true even if more wealthy customers make technology investments independent of utility programs. Any future we envision here has to include the customers who can't afford to plug and play and don't want to plug and play. Third, the vision has to take into account the fact that we have an existing system that has worked well and is not going away. Our electric grid is not a greenfield operation, it's not the end of the internet, and we are not starting from scratch. We have to blend the old and the new, and that is not going to happen overnight. And frankly, there may be better ways to decarbonize too. On a dollars per ton of carbon removed basis, distributed generation resources may not be as cost effective as carbonless central station resources. All this is not to say that plug and play future will not happen. It may, but to an unknown extent. I really applaud the work that attempts to achieve interoperability. I applaud the work of NIST in developing standards. I particularly applaud the work of EPRI to give us a roadmap to understanding the various components of an integrated grid. Such work will promote a more cost-effective smart grid if and when it arrives. There certainly will be places and situations where the distributed, flexible, and renewable future will work best for individual customers and the whole system. And when those cases present themselves, I'm all in. But our vision has to be an accessible vision for all consumers, not just the early adopters, not just those that can use personal capital to manage personal energy costs. The grid is really a community investment. So in conclusion, in my humble opinion, a reliable, affordable electric grid is one of the greatest public goods an advanced economy can provide for its citizens, and it ranks right up there, in my opinion, with national security and with rule of law. It has to apply to everybody and has to serve everybody. Now we need to decarbonize it. Smart grid investments are a tool to help us decarbonize the power grid while keeping it affordable and reliable, but a smart grid alone is not the goal, at least it's not for this regulator. Thank you for your time.
Well, good morning, everyone. So, I come from Arizona. In Arizona, our greatest natural resource is the sun. And at APS, we have invested $3 billion, $3 billion with a B in solar energy. Our commitment is clear, and we have been leading in this space since 1956 when we hosted the first International Solar Conference right there in Phoenix, Arizona. We're also focused on the future and moving forward. And to achieve the sustainable energy future that we all envision, we're going to have to accomplish two things. We are going to have to appropriately modernize our grid, and we're also going to have to modernize our pricing. And I'm going to touch on both of those things. So it's obvious the way we use energy is changing, and a lot of the conversation starts with rooftop solar, but that's certainly not where it ends, and you all know that. Electric vehicles, even in Arizona, are growing in number every day. Energy efficiency is no longer an option, it's a requirement. And the technology that's available for smart homes is pretty amazing these days, and it is growing in its capabilities at astonishing speed. So our grid was built decades ago, and it was built to be robust and reliable, to make sure that we could provide power to customers under every circumstance. It was also largely static. Things didn't change, or they changed so infrequently that it didn't need to be very automated. In fact, it was not automated at all until recently. But that's not going to serve us as we move forward with the proliferation of rooftop solar, with the advancement of these other technologies that we are seeing in ever-increasing numbers. We are going to need a more digital and more automated grid, and we are working very hard at that at Arizona Public Service. We're going to need to deploy advanced technologies like battery storage. We're working on that today. We're going to need flexible gas generation, like Barbara mentioned, that can complement the intermittent resources that are coming onto our system. And we're definitely going to need two-way flow of not only power, but information with devices like advanced meters. At APS, we've fully deployed our advanced meter system. In fact, we're actually working on our next generation or our second deployment and second set of meters in that space. Our customers, about 3% of our customers have installed rooftop solar, about 33,000. And APS earlier this year introduced a new program called the Solar Partners Program. For 1,500 of our customers, we are going to install solar that APS will own and operate for that customer in exchange for a payment for renting the roof. Now, this project and this program has a couple of different objectives. One is very targeted deployment in our system so that we can make sure that we maximize the contributions of that distributed resource to the overall system benefit. We're going to be deploying things like west-facing panels to get greater capacity when we need it, advanced inverters. We're also going to be providing these services to a category of customers that have just never had the opportunity to participate before. Customers like low-income customers. So rooftop solar can provide benefits to the grid, and we are working really hard to identify and maximize the way to extract that value. But even so, rooftop solar relies on the grid 24 hours a day. When the sun isn't shining at night, when a home is producing more energy than it can consume, it relies on the grid to deliver that energy to the community, or when it's not producing as much as the home needs at any point in time. There's been discussion about going off the grid, cutting the cord. Absolutely possible. The technology exists today, but there's two issues with that. One is it's pretty expensive, many multiples of what it costs to receive power from the local utility today. And the other one is reliability. We all count on energy when we want it and as much as we want. And going off grid changes that dynamic pretty substantially. It is certainly feasible to cut the cord, but we don't see it happening in great numbers, at least in the near term. So moving on to modernizing pricing, just like the grid needs to be modernized, and the grid was designed and is functioning in a very similar way for the past 50, 60, 70, 100 years, our pricing structure is a century old as well. And it worked just fine in the traditional format, but it's really outdated today. And this discussion is not just an Arizona's discussion. It's not just a California discussion. It's happening all across the country. It started, I would say, significantly in Arizona in 2013. There have been some significant decisions made in Wisconsin in 2014. Back to Arizona in 2015 with Salt River Project, a utility that we share much of Phoenix with. And it's being discussed in earnest in 24 states across the country. So Arizona has been a leader. The conversation really ramped in 2013 when the Arizona Corporation Commission recognized the issue, and they approved a grid access charge of about $5 a month for a new solar customer going forward. And then earlier this year, SRP also approved a new rate structure for solar customers going forward. We currently have a proposal in front of the Arizona Corporation Commission to continue that progress. And what we are requesting is we update the grid access charge from $5 a month to approximately $21 a month. Would not affect customers who have already made the commitment. And customers can still save money by going solar. Solar prices have come down to the extent that it really is still affordable and economical, even with modernizing rates as we move forward. Customers can avoid that charge entirely by going on a residential demand rate that we have had in place since the 1970s. And that demand rate, we believe, is much more closer to where we need to take pricing in the future. So our job is to look at the big picture, not to look at just today, tomorrow, next year, but to look 10, 20 years down the road. That's something that we share with our regulators. We want to make sure we're making the right investments at the right time for our customers. And as such, we are working with the local solar industry for this transition. We have announced and are working on a 200-home pilot where we are going to take solar technology, energy storage, home energy management systems, and other technologies, and we're going to apply them to those 200 customers. And then we're also going to bring in rate structure as well. So we're creating this rate laboratory that we're going to learn from, and the solar industry is going to learn from. And we're going to figure out how to move into this sustainable energy future together. It's something that we're very proud of and we're very excited by. So in summary, Arizona is number 2 in the nation in terms of solar per capita. We're very proud of that. APS has been in the top 10, top 5 actually, the last year in 4 different categories in the Solar Electric Power Association's annual rankings. And we provide solar to 250,000 Arizona homes. We're committed to a sustainable energy future, and to achieve that future, we have to focus on modernizing our grid as well as modernizing our rate structure. Thank you.
So I know we're running a bit late, but questions from the audience for any one of our panelists. We'll have mic runners coming around. I see one right here.
Hi. I guess this question could be for anybody on the panel, but specifically for Commissioner Ackerman. I really liked what you said, that smart grid is a means to an end rather than the objective, and I like how you summarize the objective of decarbonizing at a cost-effective way and keeping grid reliability up. But I guess I wonder, do you feel then like it's your role as a commissioner in the Public Utilities Commission role to create markets to bring forward the best solutions to that problem? And if so, what markets do you think are kind of the low-hanging fruit or the ones that you really need to create?
Whoops, I'm so sorry about that. That was a very good question. I don't actually see it as my responsibility to create markets for this technology. And frankly, you guys don't want me to create markets for this technology. When I said that there are limits to what regulators can do, I really meant that. I personally don't believe that the government does a good job of creating markets and deciding which technologies work best. So no, I don't think it's part of my job. It's not in my statutes. My job is to take care of consumers that get service now. What I can see in the future is I can see a time when consumer preferences evolve, where the technology evolves, where it actually makes sense and we need to start focusing more attention on individual smaller components of the distribution system, and where it's going to be important to make sure that that can happen so that consumers continue to get the best quality service at the lowest cost they can get. And so when I said earlier that we'll be paying very close attention to facts and context and let things develop, that's what I meant. So I can see a time when we do need to make a big move, but I don't see it right now. Solar penetration on our distribution systems is very low still in Oregon, and most of the solar resource isn't in the urban areas, it's on the east side of the system, so I suspect we will probably be a late adopter system for that reason. So.
Thank you, great panel. question. In the late 90s, we spent a lot of time talking about retail choice. And after the West-wide power crisis, that sort of went away for a while. Where now less than 20 states in the United States have some manner of retail choice as we were thinking about it then. I would submit that what we're viewing today is another outgrowth of retail choice. People want to decide how they want. Consumers want to. From a regulator and from a utility perspective, you're in two states that don't particularly have robust retail choice by statute and by regulation. Isn't what we're really dealing with and what regulators and utilities need to think about from the consumer? And I believe the speaker from EPRI made that very observation. But from a regulator and a utilities perspective, what choices are you going to be offering, and is it through rate design or otherwise?
So I'm happy to go first. So you're correct in your general premise. I would say that a lot of what's happening today is about control over your own energy future and optionality. I'll set aside the retail choice discussion. That's a whole other conference, I'm sure. But with respect to consumer choice, I think there is an obligation by the utility to focus on providing optionality for customers. And that optionality can come in a whole variety of different ways. Rates is a traditional way that we provide choices, and we have a whole a suite of ways to serve a customer's particular lifestyle through a rate. Products are important, and I think utilities are becoming increasingly engaged in that space and aware that products are going to be important as well. Enabling choice for customers who want to leverage technology through another provider is important. But there are customers who are going to want utilities to provide options in that space too. So I think the right answer is all of that needs to be a part of our future, and it needs to be something that we work on together in the appropriate way to provide customers what they really want. We may think we know what they want. The market is changing and evolving, and I think there's going to be a lot to be learned in the next handful of years, the next decade, over what customers really want when it comes to energy choice.
I think the question is a great question, and I agree with you. What Oregon did was it decided that it would restructure the utilities for the industrial customers, so the very large customers had the ability to go to the market and choose. We kept the small customer, that's a residential small commercial customer, with the utility. And so I can see that sometime in the future, I don't know when this will be, I think this is an unknown, is the timing of this, that there may be enough interest and technology available that consumers really want to have those choices, and we will respond. It's not something that I'm going to force, because I don't think you want me to tell them what their options are and what technologies they ought to be adopting. I think the market is developing, and it's doing just fine, and it ought to continue to develop as it can, and we will respond when it happens.
I might just add on that, and thank you for referencing the EPRI presentation regarding customer choice. Part of what the technology will offer going forward is the ability for the customer to engage as much as he or she would like with their energy management system, but also to back off and not engage if they prefer. So what we're seeing is in appliances today, chips are being placed. You all remember I referenced the fact that communications and intelligence in the system will be so important. They can communicate with each other, those appliances, and what the homeowner can do in that particular instance is just program the home to do whatever he or she would like and just let it go on autopilot, or they can actively transact with it on a daily or hourly basis, however much they want. But that's the enabling technology that will come forward so that the customer choice is exercised across an entire array of spectrum.
Great. Well, with that, we're at time. I want to thank our panelists for a great discussion. We have a quick networking break coming up, and then a great sort of late morning agenda. So feel free to take your break, and folks will be around for questions afterwards if you need to. Thank you.